My name is Samantha, 33 years old, and my family truly believed they could treat me like their disposable, unpaid servant. Exactly 1 week before Christmas, I stood outside my childhood home and overheard my mother plotting to trap me inside my own apartment with 3 screaming children so she could jet off on a luxury vacation. Fast forward to Christmas Eve. I was reclining in a first-class cabin flying high over the Atlantic Ocean when my phone rang. My mother was shrieking into the receiver. She was stranded on my pitch-black freezing porch in a Chicago blizzard, with my sister's kids screaming that they were going to miss their flight. I simply took a sip of my vintage champagne, told her to enjoy her new life as a full-time babysitter, and hung up. Absolute chaos erupted in the background before the line finally cut off completely. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives who saw you as a resource to be exploited. The total collapse of my family began on a freezing Tuesday evening in the affluent Chicago suburb of Winnetka. I was standing on the pristine snow-covered walkway of my parents' large brick colonial house, clutching an armful of beautifully wrapped early Christmas gifts. The biting wind whipped my hair across my face, reflecting the icy, detached feeling I always experienced when visiting my childhood home. Growing up, our house was a masterclass in appearances over authenticity. My mother, Brenda, was obsessed with maintaining a flawless social image, while my father, Richard, was a passive enabler who always blindly took her side without question. I was the family scapegoat, the quiet, responsible daughter who funded her own college education and built a demanding career entirely from scratch. As a VIP hospitality auditor for a global luxury hotel and travel conglomerate, my job was to detect high-level corporate fraud, manage exclusive executive accounts, and ensure compliance across our international five-star properties. I was financially independent, highly educated, entirely self-sufficient, and completely unappreciated. I spent my days catching criminals who tried to exploit loopholes, yet I was completely blind to the exploitation happening within my own bloodline. My younger sister, Ashley, who is 30, was the exact opposite of everything I stood for. She was the golden child, a woman who treated life like an endless social media photoshoot while contributing absolutely nothing of substance to society. She had never held a real job, preferring to play the role of a suburban housewife while relying entirely on others to fund her aesthetic. Ashley was married to Jamal, a 32-year-old African-American insurance broker whose flashy lifestyle and aggressive entitlement perfectly matched my sister's vanity. Jamal loved wearing designer suits he could barely afford and driving leased luxury cars to project an image of massive wealth. Together they had 3 children: Tyler, who is 7, Zoe, who is 5, and Jaden, who is 3. My niece and nephews were wild, undisciplined terrors who destroyed everything they touched because Ashley and Jamal believed that parenting meant letting children express themselves without any boundaries or consequences. I had spent my entire adult life being emotionally drained and financially leveraged by these people. Every major holiday, every child's birthday, every minor inconvenience in Ashley's chaotic life somehow became my mandatory personal responsibility. I was expected to constantly lend them money that they never intended to pay back, fix their self-inflicted problems, and absorb my mother's constant passive-aggressive remarks about my single status. According to Brenda, because I was 33, fiercely independent and deliberately unmarried, my personal time and hard-earned resources technically belonged to the family collective. In her twisted mind, my demanding corporate career was just a temporary placeholder until I found a wealthy husband, a concept I found both incredibly insulting and utterly ridiculous, given that my annual salary was easily 3 times what Jamal brought home on his best year. They resented my success, but felt entirely entitled to the fruits of my labor. As I stepped onto the expansive front porch that evening, ready to deliver their gifts and endure another painful family dinner, I noticed the heavy oak front door was slightly ajar. The storm door was closed, but the main door had not latched properly. Warm light spilled out onto the snow, along with the unmistakable sound of clinking glasses and raucous laughter. I raised my hand to knock, but my knuckles froze inches from the glass. I heard my name echoing from the living room, spoken with a dripping condescension that rooted my boots to the frozen concrete. I held my breath, the freezing air burning my lungs, and leaned slightly closer to the narrow opening. I could see straight into the formal living room, which looked like a scene pulled directly from a luxury catalog. A roaring fire crackled brightly in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows and illuminating the smug, relaxed faces of my mother, my father, my sister, and my brother-in-law. They were toasting with crystal flutes of expensive wine, their faces glowing with an unnatural, greedy excitement that made my stomach churn. There was no sign of the three children who were likely upstairs destroying the playroom, while the adults conspired downstairs. I stood completely still, a silent ghost in the harsh Chicago winter, as the first layer of their ultimate betrayal began to unfold right in front of my own eyes. They had absolutely no idea I was standing right there on the porch listening to every toxic word they said. They had no idea. They were eagerly digging their own graves. My mother raised her glass higher, her voice cutting through the winter air like a sharpened blade, and began to outline a plan so malicious I could hardly believe my own ears. Ashley nodded enthusiastically, aggressively, adjusting a glittering diamond tennis necklace that I highly suspected was purchased entirely on credit. "Tell me about it," she whined, taking a massive gulp of her wine before letting out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh. "I love my babies so much, but I absolutely cannot handle dealing with them 24 hours a day on a luxury winter vacation. They would completely ruin the entire upscale vibe we are going for." Tyler breaks absolutely everything he touches. Zoe screams at the top of her lungs when she does not get her way instantly, and Jaden is not even fully potty trained yet. I absolutely refuse to spend my exclusive Aspen trip changing filthy diapers in a rustic ski lodge while everyone else is getting hot stone massages at the premium spa. We need to be hitting the slopes and attending the exclusive networking parties, not playing referee to a bunch of toddlers. My mother. Brenda waved her manicured hand dismissively through the warm air of the living room. It was an elegant, practiced gesture that perfectly masked the pure, unfiltered toxicity of her soul. "Oh, do not worry about the children for a single second," Ashley, she said with a chilling, calculated laugh that sent shivers directly down my freezing spine. "Your father and I have everything perfectly arranged for you both. We are definitely not bringing them with us to the mountains, and we are certainly not wasting our vacation budget paying for an expensive professional nanny for 2 whole weeks. That would be an absurd waste of good money." My father Richard sat silently in his overstuffed armchair, nodding along like a perfectly compliant shadow. He took a slow sip of his bourbon, his eyes fixed blankly on the television screen, completely unbothered by the sinister plot his wife was currently unraveling in their living room. I pressed myself flat against the freezing brick exterior of the house, my heart beginning to pound a heavy warning rhythm against my ribs. The cold snow seeped through my designer boots, but I could not feel my toes anymore. All I could focus on was the impending disaster. What exactly was the plan they had hatched behind my back? Brenda gracefully set her crystal wine glass down on the glass coffee table and leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a sickening level of malice. "It is incredibly simple," she explained, her voice practically purring with deep satisfaction. "I am going to call Samantha tomorrow and invite her to host a special Christmas Eve dinner at her own downtown apartment. I will tell her that we want to do something very intimate this year, just the immediate family at her place. We will all arrive around 6 in the evening. We will bring the kids. We will bring some cheap takeout food to keep her busy, and we will make sure she is completely distracted in the kitchen setting everything up for us." Jamal chuckled again, a deep vibrating sound that made my blood boil hot enough to melt the snow around my feet. "And then what? We just slip out the back door while she is not looking." "Exactly." Brenda smiled, showing all her perfectly whitened teeth in a predator's grin. "We will quietly leave all the children's heavy luggage packed away in her spare bedroom right when we arrive. She will not even notice. Then while she is plating the food and fussing over the table settings, the four of us will quietly grab our heavy winter coats. We will slip out the front door, lock it securely from the outside, and get straight into Jamal's warm car. Our flight leaves Chicago O'Hare International Airport at 9 o'clock sharp. By the time Samantha realizes we are gone, we will already be halfway to the departure gate. She will be trapped inside with the kids and no way to reach us. Ashley actually clapped her hands together in sheer delight, bouncing slightly on the leather cushions. Mom, that is absolutely brilliant. You are a genius. But wait, what if she gets furious and calls the cops or something? What if she flat out refuses to watch them and tries to drop them off at the police station? Brenda scoffed loudly, producing a sound filled with such absolute contempt for my very existence that it took my breath away. What is she going to do? Abandon her own helpless niece and nephews on Christmas Eve? Call the police on her own loving parents during the holidays? She will not do a single thing. She never does. She will just complain, cry a little, and then do exactly what she is told. Her entire identity is wrapped up in being the reliable one, which means we hold all the power. We have conditioned her perfectly. Besides, she is 33, entirely single, and has absolutely no life of her own. It is not like she has romantic holiday plans or fancy parties to cancel. She sits around doing nothing all day anyway, just focusing on that boring corporate job. Watching her family's children for 2 weeks is the absolute least she can do to repay us. It is her duty to support her sister, so Ashley can have the marriage and lifestyle she truly deserves. We are simply making sure she fulfills her natural obligations to us. It is entirely justified and just completely fair. Brenda scoffed loudly, producing a sound filled with such absolute contempt for my very existence that it took my breath away. What is she going to do? Abandon her own helpless niece and nephews on Christmas Eve? Call the police on her own loving parents during the holidays? She will not do a single thing. She never does. She will just complain, cry a little, and then do exactly what she is told. Her entire identity is wrapped up in being the reliable one, which means we hold all the power. We have conditioned her perfectly. Besides, she is 33, entirely single, and has absolutely no life of her own. It is not like she has romantic holiday plans or fancy parties to cancel. She sits around doing nothing all day anyway, just focusing on that boring corporate job. Watching her family's children for 2 weeks is the absolute least she can do to repay us. It is her duty to support her sister, so Ashley can have the marriage and lifestyle she truly deserves. We are simply making sure she fulfills her natural obligations to us. She will comply with our instructions without failing. Ashley frowned slightly, looking down at her perfectly manicured nails. Okay, the babysitting is... she said, her voice dropping a fraction to convey a rare moment of anxiety. But Mom, I am still stressed about the money situation. Aspen is ridiculously expensive, and Jamal's insurance commissions have been terrible this entire quarter. How are we paying for all this luxury without going completely bankrupt? Richard shifted in his armchair, clearing his throat. His voice was casual for a man confessing to a severe felony. Do not worry about the funds, sweetheart, he said, not even looking away from the television screen. I took care of it yesterday morning. I went to the local bank branch and closed out that old joint emergency savings account. The one I opened with Samantha when she was a freshman in college. It had about $25,000 sitting in it. I transferred it all directly to Jamal's checking account to cover your daily spending money. My breath caught violently in my throat. That $25,000 was entirely my money. I had deposited my annual corporate bonuses into that specific account for years, keeping my father on the documentation, simply because I had never bothered to remove his name after graduation. It was my carefully guarded safety net. But Dad, Ashley asked, suddenly sounding genuinely nervous. Does not the bank strictly require both account holders' signatures to completely close a joint account with that much money sitting in it? Richard waved his hand dismissively. Technically, yes, that is the policy. But the head teller knows me from my golf club, and I just forged Samantha's signature on the withdrawal slip right there at the counter. I told them she was traveling overseas for a corporate audit and had given me permission over the phone to consolidate our assets. They pushed the transfer right through without a single question. It is family money anyway, and she owes us for raising her. I gripped the rough, freezing brick wall to keep my trembling knees from buckling beneath me. My own father had just committed blatant bank fraud and stolen my entire life savings to fund my sister's winter vacation. But the waking nightmare was not over. Jamal laughed loudly, slapping his thigh in amusement. Man, between that 25,000 and the flight hookup, this will be the cheapest luxury vacation ever. He reached forward and tapped the screen of an iPad resting on the coffee table. You saved our lives with this brilliant move, Brenda. I just finalized the booking 10 minutes ago. First-class flights for all of us, plus 2 executive suites at the premier ski resort. The cost was over $40,000, but the system zeroed it out completely at checkout. Brenda smiled smugly. I told you my plan would work perfectly. Samantha left her work laptop open on our kitchen island the last time she was here for dinner. I quietly copied down her corporate VIP employee code and the corresponding executive billing numbers while she was helping your father in the garage. Her specific code automatically bypasses all standard payment gateways. The company just blindly absorbs the massive cost as an approved executive expense. She will not even notice it until the end of the January billing cycle, and by the time she figures it out, we will be perfectly tanned. My heart stopped beating. My vision blurred at the freezing edges as the crushing gravity of what my mother had proudly confessed crashed down on me. She had not merely stolen my personal money. She had brazenly stolen my highly restricted corporate credentials. My VIP code was used exclusively for emergency executive travel and international auditing missions. By using it to book $40,000 worth of personal luxury travel, my family had committed federal wire fraud and corporate theft. When our accounting department eventually flagged the unauthorized charges, I would be the only one held legally responsible. I would be immediately terminated from the job I loved, permanently stripped of my professional industry licenses, and prosecuted for grand larceny by my own employer. My mother had knowingly gambled with my entire career, my personal freedom, and my future, all just to secure a free ski trip for the golden child and her entitled husband. I stood frozen in the snow, looking through the glass at the people who were supposed to be my loving family. They were laughing warmly, cheerfully, toasting to their own deceptive brilliance, unbothered by the fact that their selfish actions would leave me financially ruined, professionally disgraced, and trapped inside my apartment with their 3 neglected children. The burning urge to kick the door open and confront them vanished entirely, replaced instantly by an icy, terrifying clarity that settled deep into my bones. Screaming at them would solve nothing tonight. It would only give them a precious chance to deny everything, to manipulate the narrative, to play the helpless victims, and to hastily cancel the flights before the damage was permanent. They had launched a coordinated, vicious attack on my livelihood and my freedom. They had declared war on me. I lowered the Christmas gifts onto the porch, leaving them like forgotten trash. I turned my back on the warm window and walked silently down the icy driveway toward my parked car. The crunch of my boots on the snow was the only sound in the quiet night. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, a cold, predatory smile spread across my face. My family thought they had outsmarted me. They believed I was just a helpless scapegoat who would quietly absorb their abuse. They had no idea that as a corporate fraud auditor, methodically dismantling complex financial crimes and destroying the people responsible was literally what I did for a living every single day. I slipped into my cold car, started the quiet engine, and pulled away into the dark night. The plan for their destruction had just begun. Monday morning arrived crisp and sharp. The bitter Chicago wind whipped at my wool coat as I walked into the downtown branch of my bank at exactly 9 in the morning. I bypassed the standard teller line where everyday customers stood shifting their weight and walked directly toward the glass-walled offices reserved for high-net-worth clients and corporate accounts. I did not have an appointment, but my posture and the heavy leather portfolio clutched in my hand communicated that I was not a woman who planned on waiting. I opened the heavy glass door to the branch manager office and closed it firmly behind me. His name was David, and I had dealt with him extensively over the past 5 years when setting up my complex corporate salary routing and personal investment portfolios. David looked up from his dual monitors, initially surprised by the intrusion. He greeted me with a warm, professional smile that quickly vanished the moment he saw my stone-cold expression. I did not return his greeting. I simply walked over to his mahogany desk, sat down in the leather guest chair, and slid my portfolio across the polished wood surface. I need an immediate high-level fraud investigation opened on my joint emergency savings account, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of any emotion. A withdrawal of $25,000 was made late last week using a forged signature. David looked genuinely alarmed. He quickly adjusted his glasses and turned to his monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The rapid, anxious clicking filled the quiet office as he pulled up my financial profiles. He located the specific joint account I shared with my father and pulled up the transaction history. I watched the color drain from his face as he confirmed the massive withdrawal. He noted that the funds had been transferred via a cashier check and deposited directly into a checking account belonging to Jamal. He then pulled up the scanned image of the withdrawal slip used at the suburban Winnetka branch. Before he could even attempt to offer an excuse or a corporate apology, I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a meticulously organized evidence file. As a professional auditor, building an airtight case against financial criminals was my specialty, and I had spent my entire weekend preparing this specific trap. I laid the documents out on his desk one by one. First, I presented printed copies of my corporate building security camera footage, showing me entering my downtown Chicago office building. Next, I provided my corporate keycard swipe logs and biometric scan data, proving conclusively that I was locked inside a secure executive auditing room on the completely opposite side of the city at the exact minute the fraudulent withdrawal was executed in the suburbs. Finally, I handed him two sworn digital affidavits from senior corporate executives who had been sitting in the same room with me all afternoon. I then pulled out my state identification card, my passport, and my corporate badge, laying them next to the screen displaying the fraudulent withdrawal slip. I want you to perform a forensic comparison of my actual legal signature against the rushed, sloppy forgery my father submitted to your teller, I instructed. You can clearly see that the slant is entirely wrong, the pressure points are inconsistent, and he did not even bother to loop the final letter correctly. Your suburban teller pushed through a massive unauthorized withdrawal without performing basic identity verification. My father committed blatant bank fraud, and your institution facilitated the theft of my life savings. David examined the documents, his breathing growing shallow as he realized the catastrophic magnitude of the crime and the immense legal liability his branch was now facing. This is a severe federal offense, Samantha, he said quietly, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. The bank could be held fully liable for this oversight. We will have to freeze the receiving account immediately and initiate a hard chargeback to recover the funds. The local police and federal banking investigators will also need to be notified today, since the stolen amount easily crosses the grand larceny threshold. He reached for his desk phone, ready to hit the panic button and alert the fraud department. I reached across the desk and placed my hand firmly over the receiver, stopping him instantly. Do not reverse the transfer and do not flag Jamal account just yet, I commanded. If you pull the money back right now, the suspects will receive an automated alert on their mobile banking apps. They will be tipped off immediately, and they might panic, attempt to flee the state, or try to hide other assets before the upcoming holiday weekend. I am building a much larger corporate case against them, and I need the trap to spring on my exact schedule. David stared at me clearly, intimidated by my precise, calculated demands. What do you want me to do? He asked nervously. I want you to leave the stolen $25,000 sitting in Jamal's account, I explained. But I need you to initiate a total fraud lockdown on every single asset my father holds with this institution. Freeze his checking accounts, freeze his personal savings, freeze his retirement portfolios, and suspend all of his credit cards pending a federal investigation for identity theft and forgery. I want him entirely locked out of the financial system, but I do not want him notified. Let him find out his money is gone when his card gets declined at a cash register. David nodded quickly, his hands shaking slightly as he executed the commands on his computer. With a few swift keystrokes, my father unknowingly became financially paralyzed. Richard had just triggered a federal banking investigation that would soon crash down on him like a concrete wall. By the time he realized the money he stole was tainted, he would already be drowning in crippling legal fees and facing potential prison time without access to a single dollar to pay for a defense attorney. Now for the final step. I said, leaning back in my chair. I refuse to leave any of my remaining assets vulnerable to my family greed or this bank incompetent tellers. I need every single cent from my individual checking my high-yield savings and my personal investment accounts transferred immediately. I slid a document across the desk containing international routing numbers. Move it all to this secure, untraceable offshore account I established in Switzerland last year. Leave absolutely nothing but zero balances attached to my name here in Chicago. David processed the international wire transfers without a single argument, desperate to appease me and avoid an immediate lawsuit against the bank. I watched the screens intently as my hard-earned wealth was securely encrypted and routed far beyond the greedy reach of my toxic parents and my entitled sister. The money was safe. The bank fraud trap was officially set. My father's financial execution was locked and loaded in the system, just waiting for the clock to run out. I gathered my pristine documents, slid them back into my leather portfolio, and stood up from the chair. I thanked David for his rapid cooperation, turned on my heel, and walked out of the bank with a perfectly straight spine. The cold Chicago air hit my face as I stepped back onto the bustling city street, but I felt incredibly warm inside. Step one was complete. Now it was time to address the $40,000 corporate felony my mother had so arrogantly orchestrated. I drove straight from the bank to the gleaming glass skyscraper that housed my company, corporate headquarters, in the heart of the Chicago financial district. Walking through the revolving doors, I flashed my top-tier executive badge at the security desk. The guards nodded respectfully, parting the turnstiles for me without a single word. As a VIP hospitality auditor, I held Level 5 security clearance, granting me unrestricted access to the most secure floors of the building. I bypassed the standard elevators and stepped into the private executive lift, pressing the button for the Cybersecurity and Fraud Prevention Division on the 42nd floor. The elevator shot upward, leaving the noise of the city far below. I felt a surge of absolute power coursing through my veins. My mother had severely underestimated the kind of access and authority I wielded in my professional life. She viewed me as a simple employee, completely ignorant of the fact that I spent my days dismantling international embezzlement rings and destroying financial criminals. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the dimly lit, highly secure monitoring floor. I walked past rows of glass offices where analysts monitored global transactions. I headed directly to the corner office belonging to Diana, the director of cybersecurity. Diana was a sharp, fiercely intelligent woman who had been my closest professional ally for the past 6 years. We had worked side by side to expose corrupt hotel managers and catch corporate spies, developing a mutual respect built on absolute ruthlessness when it came to protecting company assets. I did not bother knocking. I opened her heavy glass door, stepped inside, and locked it firmly behind me. Diana looked up from her multiple monitors, her eyebrows raised in surprise at the intrusion. Before she could ask any questions, I walked over to her desk and dropped a printed log of the Aspen booking right on top of her keyboard. Someone in my immediate family stole my highly restricted executive VIP credential code, I stated bluntly, watching her sharp eyes immediately snap down to the paper. They used it last night to book $40,000 worth of first-class flights and premium executive suites at the Aspen Summit Resort under my corporate billing profile. Diana snatched the paper from her desk, her expression instantly shifting from surprise to cold professional fury. She scanned the booking details, reading the passenger names out loud: Jamal, Ashley, Richard, and Brenda. She looked up at me, her jaw clenched tight. Samantha, this is an incredibly severe breach of corporate protocol. This code is reserved exclusively for emergency executive travel and high-stakes auditing missions. Using it for a personal family ski trip is blatant corporate espionage and grand larceny. She immediately reached for her mouse, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. I am voiding these tickets right now and permanently blacklisting these passengers from all our affiliated airlines and properties. We will have the local authorities pick them up today for felony wire fraud. No, I said, leaning over her desk and placing my hand firmly over hers. I stopped her fingers from striking the keys. If you cancel the tickets right now, the booking system will send an automated email notification directly to Jamal's inbox. They will instantly realize they have been caught. They will just panic, claim their accounts were hacked, and try to find another desperate way out of the city before the holidays. I need them to believe they have gotten away with it. I want you to place a silent fraud red flag on the entire itinerary. Diana paused, staring at my hand covering hers. She slowly looked up at my face, and a slow, understanding, wicked smile began to spread across her features. She recognized exactly what I was planning to do. A silent flag meant the booking would appear completely normal and fully confirmed on all consumer-facing websites and mobile airline apps. My greedy, entitled family would be able to repeatedly check their flight status view, their premium first-class seat assignments, and pack their designer winter bags with total unearned confidence. They would march into the airport feeling like absolute royalty. But the absolute second Jamal handed his identification to the check-in agent at the priority counter, the system would detonate like a hidden landmine. The tickets would be instantly voided right in front of their faces. More importantly, strict corporate security policy dictated that any fraudulent, unauthorized use of an executive billing code triggered an automatic, non-refundable punitive penalty charge. The system would bypass all authorizations and execute a direct chargeback to the personal credit card held on file. Jamal had foolishly used his own personal credit card to secure the minor incidentals for the trip. The moment that red flag dropped at the airport, the airline system would charge his personal credit card, the full $40,000, immediately maxing out his limits and draining his accounts in a fraction of a second. Diana typed furiously for a few tense seconds before hitting the enter key with a deeply satisfying heavy click. The silent flag is officially active, she confirmed, turning her main monitor so I could clearly see the hidden, glowing red alert status attached to their reservation. The second they try to check their luxury bags at the priority counter, they are going to face a massive $40,000 penalty charge, and an immediate automated alert will be sent directly to airport police. I thanked Diana for her swift cooperation, feeling a profound sense of vindication wash over me. I unlocked her office door and walked back down the quiet corridor toward my own executive suite. My family was currently sitting at home in the suburbs, laughing and packing their expensive snow gear, completely unaware they were happily preparing to step onto a financial landmine that would obliterate their entire lives. The corporate trap was perfectly set and waiting for them right now. I returned to my corner office, locking the heavy mahogany door behind me. I walked over to my desk and opened my personal secure browser. It was time to initiate step 3 of my plan. For years, I had spent my holidays catering to the relentless demands of my family, enduring Brenda's sharp insults and Ashley's exhausting tantrums. I had never taken a real vacation during the Christmas season because I was always expected to be the reliable backup plan. That era was officially over. I logged into my newly secured offshore account and smiled at the massive end-of-year executive bonus that had just cleared. I had earned every single cent of that money through grueling 80-hour work weeks and high-stakes corporate negotiations. My family had viewed me as a pathetic spinster with no life, but they failed to realize that my lack of social distractions had allowed me to amass a level of personal wealth they could only dream of stealing. I decided right then and there that I was not just going to escape their trap. I was going to reward myself with the most extravagant holiday experience money could buy. I bypassed the standard travel websites and logged directly into an elite concierge portal reserved for top-tier executives. I typed in my destination, Zermatt, Switzerland. If my family wanted to steal a winter vacation in Aspen, I was going to outdo them on a global scale. I booked a first-class ticket on Swiss Air, selecting a premium lie-flat pod departing from Chicago O'Hare at 10 in the morning on Christmas Eve. My flight would leave exactly 8 hours before my family planned to ambush my apartment. I then secured a panoramic penthouse suite at a legendary 5-star alpine resort. The suite featured a wraparound heated balcony, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the iconic Matterhorn. I did not stop there. I scheduled daily private ski lessons with an Olympic-level instructor, booked a series of hot stone spa treatments, and secured a highly coveted reservation at a Michelin star restaurant for Christmas dinner. I paid for the entire luxurious itinerary up front using my legitimate funds. The transaction went through seamlessly. A wave of profound satisfaction washed over me as the confirmation emails flooded my inbox. While my mother was busy orchestrating a malicious scheme to lock me inside my apartment with three screaming, destructive children, I would be thousands of miles away, wrapped in pure cashmere, sipping expensive imported wine, and looking down at the snow-covered Swiss Alps. The stark, deniable contrast between my impending luxury and their impending legal and financial ruin was absolutely delicious. I printed my boarding passes, slipped them into my leather travel wallet, and spent the rest of the afternoon wrapping up my corporate audits with a clear, focused mind. I had severed their access to my finances, rigged their fraudulent travel plans to explode, and secured my own flawless escape. The rest of the week passed in a state of surreal, beautiful tranquility. I spent my evenings in my downtown Chicago apartment, methodically packing for the Alps. My apartment was a sanctuary of peace and minimalist design. Soft classical music played from my wireless speakers as I folded my designer winter clothes. I carefully packed my waterproof Prada snow pants, my thick cashmere sweaters, and my high-end ski goggles. I selected my favorite evening gowns for the Michelin star dinners and arranged my luxury skincare products in a sleek leather cosmetics case. Every movement I made was deliberate, calm, and entirely stress-free. I did not buy a single festive decoration for my apartment. I did not purchase a single ounce of food for the fake family dinner they thought I was hosting. My refrigerator remained perfectly empty, save for a bottle of expensive champagne I planned to drink before leaving. Meanwhile, miles away in the affluent suburbs, I knew exactly what kind of chaos was unfolding inside Ashley and Jamal's house. I could easily picture the scene. Their oversized, heavily mortgaged home would be a disaster zone of scattered luggage and screaming children. Tyler would be breaking ornaments off the Christmas tree. Zoe would be throwing massive tantrums on the living room floor, and Jaden would be running around leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Amidst the deafening noise, Ashley would be frantically stuffing her fake designer snow gear into oversized suitcases, complaining loudly to anyone who would listen about how exhausted she was. Jamal would be strutting around the house bragging on the phone to his unimpressed friends about the exclusive luxury vacation he had supposedly paid for with his massive insurance commissions. They were likely spending hours coordinating their outfits for social media pictures, completely blinded by their own greed and arrogant entitlement. They firmly believed they had outsmarted me. They thought my entire existence was so pathetic and insignificant that I would simply absorb their abuse, accept my fate as their unpaid nanny, and watch their children for 14 days without a single word of protest. Brenda was probably calling Ashley every few hours to gloat about the flawless execution of their trap, completely unaware that her husband was now locked out of the financial system and her son-in-law was walking straight into a $40,000 corporate felony charge. The absolute arrogance required to steal from a corporate fraud auditor was staggering, but their hubris was about to be their ultimate downfall. Every time I folded another cashmere sweater and placed it perfectly into my designer suitcase, I thought about the catastrophic reality check heading their way. They were marching eagerly toward their own destruction, driven by a toxic combination of vanity and sheer malice. They had treated me like a disposable resource for my entire adult life, draining my energy, demanding my money, and insulting my lifestyle choices at every given opportunity. But this time, they had crossed a legal and financial boundary that could never be uncrossed. I zipped my luggage shut, the satisfying sound echoing in my pristine, quiet apartment. My bags were packed. My finances were secured offshore. My corporate trap was armed and active. My family was happily packing their bags to step directly onto a devastating financial landmine, and I was going to let them blow themselves to absolute pieces. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline. The city was bracing for a massive winter storm, the kind of brutal blizzard that grounded flights and froze highways. The timing could not have been more perfect. When the trap finally sprang at the airport, they would not just be publicly humiliated and financially ruined. They would be physically stranded in the middle of a historic snowstorm with absolutely no access to their frozen bank accounts and nowhere to run. They had constructed this elaborate, malicious scheme to leave me trapped in the cold, but they had unknowingly built their own perfect prison. I smiled at my reflection in the glass, marveling at how easily decades of familial guilt had been completely erased by their unbelievable betrayal. I poured myself a single glass of champagne, raising it in a silent toast to the empty room. "Merry Christmas to me," I whispered to the empty glass. The board was set, the pieces were locked in place, and the game was officially over before they even knew they were playing. The psychological warfare officially commenced on Wednesday morning, precisely 3 days before their fabricated Christmas Eve dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen island when my phone vibrated against the marble countertop. The notification flashed across the screen, illuminating the family group chat they had ironically named Family First. I unlocked my device and watched the elaborate deception unfold in real time. My mother Brenda initiated the performance with a long, saccharine message overflowing with fake affection. "Samantha, sweetheart," the message read, "your father and I were just talking about how much we miss you. We want to do something incredibly special and intimate for Christmas Eve this year. Just the immediate family gathered around the tree. We would love to come over to your downtown apartment around 6 in the evening. We will bring the kids and pick up some nice Italian takeout on the way. It will be so cozy, just like old times." I stared at the glowing screen, feeling a fresh wave of intense disgust at how easily and naturally she lied. The sheer audacity required to type those loving words while actively planning to abandon 3 destructive children in my home and flee to a ski resort was staggering. She was setting the bait, relying entirely on my lifelong habit of eager compliance. In the past, a message like this would have sent me into a frantic tailspin of cleaning and desperate preparation. Now, it just looked like a written confession of premeditated malice. Before I could even draft a response, my sister Ashley chimed into the chat. She dropped a massive, highly specific, and outrageously expensive shopping list directly into the conversation. "Hey Sam," Ashley typed. "Since we are doing Christmas Eve at your place, you need to make sure you have the kids' gifts ready to open before dinner. Tyler specifically wants the new virtual reality gaming console, the one that costs $500. Zoe needs the limited edition luxury dollhouse from that boutique toy store downtown. Do not get the cheap plastic one, she hates those. And Jaden wants the motorized ride on sports car. Jamal and I are exhausted from working. They deserve a perfect magical Christmas, so make sure you get exactly what is on the list." The sheer entitlement of her demands was breathtaking. She was openly commanding me to spend nearly $2,000 on extravagant gifts for her poorly behaved children, knowing full well she intended to dump them on me for 2 weeks while she lived it up in Aspen on my stolen corporate dime. She added a passive-aggressive note at the very end. "Do not wait until the last minute to go shopping, Sam. You always procrastinate." It took every ounce of my professional willpower not to reply with a high-resolution screenshot of their stolen Aspen flight confirmation or a copy of the federal fraud alert currently sitting on my father's bank account. Instead, I took a deep breath, channeled my corporate composure, and began typing my response. I had to play the perfect obedient scapegoat to keep them marching blindly toward the cliff edge. "That sounds absolutely wonderful, Mom," I typed, ensuring my tone was dripping with subservience and naive enthusiasm. "I would love to host you all. The apartment is already decorated, and I will make sure everything is perfect for the kids." I then replied directly to my sister. "Do not worry at all, Ashley. I wrote down the entire toy list. I am heading to the luxury toy boutique on my lunch break today to secure Zoe's dollhouse, and I will grab Tyler's gaming console from the electronics store right after work. I have everything perfectly handled. It is going to be a Christmas Eve none of us will ever forget." My phone immediately pinged with a thumbs-up emoji from Jamal. He then sent a message of his own, clearly testing the waters, to ensure I was not planning to leave the apartment at any point during their upcoming vacation. "Hey Sam, you got any big plans for the rest of the holiday week, or just hanging out at the apartment?" The manipulation was transparent. He was verifying that the unpaid babysitter was going to remain firmly locked in her designated cage. I smiled coldly at the screen and played right into his hands. No big plans at all, Jamal, I replied quickly. I am just going to stay home, catch up on some reading, and maybe watch some classic holiday movies. I will be right here all week. Perfect, Jamal replied, looking forward to it. My father, Richard, sent the final message of the morning. Make sure your apartment heater is working properly, Samantha. The forecast says a massive blizzard is hitting Chicago on Thursday afternoon. We do not want them freezing. The dark irony of his message was poetic. He was pretending to care about his grandchildren's warmth while plotting to abandon them completely. Unaware his own financial assets were currently frozen solid by a federal investigation. The apartment is incredibly warm, Dad, I replied. Everything is ready. For the next 4 days, I kept up the charade flawlessly. Every time they texted, I responded with eager compliance. When Brenda asked me to prepare a special holiday punch, I sent her a recipe. Every text I sent was a calculated move in a psychological chess match designed to ensure they suspected absolutely nothing. They read my enthusiastic replies and saw a pathetic, isolated woman desperate for their company. They firmly believed their trap was closing perfectly around me. They had no idea that my responses were the heavy iron doors locking them into a catastrophe of their own making. I was feeding their arrogance and guaranteeing that when they finally arrived at the airport on Christmas Eve, the shock of their destruction would be inescapable. The countdown had officially begun. The morning of Christmas Eve arrived with a heavy, oppressive gray sky looming ominously over the Chicago skyline. The local weather stations had been broadcasting frantic warnings since dawn about a massive historic blizzard sweeping across the Midwest. The radar showed a brutal, unforgiving wall of snow and ice barreling directly toward the city, promising whiteout conditions, plunging temperatures, and severe travel disruptions by late afternoon. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment, holding a warm mug of black coffee, watching the first few warning flakes drift past the glass. Inside my apartment was a sanctuary of absolute silence and meticulous order. There was no Christmas tree, no festive garlands, and absolutely no expensive toys waiting for my ungrateful niece and nephews. The refrigerator was entirely empty, wiped clean of any takeout food or holiday punch ingredients Brenda had requested. I rinsed my coffee mug, placed it in the dishwasher, and grabbed my sleek designer luggage. I took one final look around the pristine living room, ensuring nothing was left out of place. The silence in the room was a stark contrast to the impending chaos. I stepped into the hallway and locked the heavy front door, twisting the deadbolt securely into place. I did not leave a spare key. I did not leave a note. I simply walked away. My private luxury car service was waiting for me at the curb right on time. The driver loaded my bags into the spacious trunk as the snow began to fall with increasing intensity, dusting the city streets in a deceptive layer of pristine white. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was smooth, but the rising panic of the city was palpable. Cars were swerving, commuters were rushing, and the collective anxiety of millions of travelers trying to outrun the storm filled the frigid air. When we arrived at Terminal 5, the main departure hall was an absolute madhouse. Thousands of frantic, exhausted passengers were huddled together screaming at ticket agents, dragging crying children, and staring desperately at the towering red departure boards showing endless delays and cancellations. I glided right past the chaos, completely untouched by the misery surrounding me. I utilized my executive status to bypass the miles-long security lines and slipped directly into the exclusive sanctuary of the first-class lounge. The heavy sliding doors closed behind me, instantly silencing the frantic noise of the terminal. The lounge was a haven of quiet opulence filled with plush leather armchairs, soft ambient lighting, and the rich scent of expensive espresso. I settled into a private corner booth overlooking the bustling tarmac and ordered a glass of vintage champagne. I pulled out my phone and checked the family group chat one last time. It was quiet. They were likely busy running around their sprawling suburban home, frantically packing their stolen luxury snow gear and congratulating themselves on their flawless scheme. They had no idea that the bank had frozen my father's accounts, or that my corporate security division was simply waiting for Jamal to hand over his identification. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the icy champagne, letting the crisp bubbles dance on my tongue. I was completely at peace. The blizzard outside was intensifying, swirling aggressively around the grounded plains. But inside my private bubble of wealth and security, the temperature was perfectly controlled. At 9:15 in the morning, a polite lounge attendant approached my booth to discreetly inform me that my Swiss Air flight to Zurich, with my onward connection to Zermatt, was ready for priority boarding. I gathered my cashmere coat and my leather travel tote, leaving my empty champagne flute on the polished mahogany table. Walking down the jet bridge, the freezing air seeping through the gaps only heightened my sense of thrilling anticipation. I stepped onto the aircraft and was immediately greeted by the chief purser, who addressed me by name and escorted me to my private lie-flat pod in the first-class cabin. The suite was an absolute marvel of modern aviation luxury, featuring warm wood accents, a massive entertainment screen, and an amenity kit filled with high-end Swiss skincare products. The flight attendant offered me a warm towel and poured another glass of champagne before takeoff. I sank into the incredibly soft, ergonomic seat, feeling the tension of the past 33 years physically evaporate from my muscles. For my entire adult life, holidays had been synonymous with severe stress, massive financial drain, and constant emotional abuse at the hands of my toxic family. Now I was being pampered like absolute royalty, while the architects of my misery were marching blindly toward their own execution. The massive jet engines roared to life, vibrating deeply through the floor of the cabin. The aircraft taxied slowly down the snowy runway, picking up tremendous speed before lifting smoothly into the turbulent winter air. I looked out the window as we ascended through the violent, swirling snowstorm blanketing Chicago. The plane shuddered slightly as it fought the heavy blizzard, but within minutes we broke through the dark, heavy cloud cover and burst into a realm of brilliant, blinding sunlight and endless blue skies. The transition was breathtaking and highly symbolic. I had finally broken through the suffocating darkness of my family control and entered an entirely new atmosphere of absolute freedom. The seatbelt sign chimed off with a soft ping. I retrieved my smartphone from my leather tote and connected to the premium high-speed in-flight Wi-Fi network. The secure connection was flawless. I opened my smart home security application and tapped on the live camera feeds. The screen populated instantly. I checked the camera monitoring my front door in the apartment hallway, and the camera angled directly at my living room. The feeds were crystal clear, showing my dark, empty, locked apartment. I adjusted the motion sensor settings, ensuring that any movement at my front door would trigger an immediate silent notification directly to my phone. Everything was perfectly operational. The digital cage was primed. I leaned back into my plush seat, pulled the thick cashmere blanket up over my lap, and let out a long, highly satisfied exhale. The trap was officially set. The flight across the Atlantic Ocean was a dream. I spent the afternoon indulging in a gourmet meal insulated from the harsh reality back in the Midwest. The flight attendants ensured my champagne flute was never empty. The luxury was a stark reminder of the life I had built on my own merits. The digital clock on my smartphone synced to the changing time zones. It was approaching midnight over the ocean, which meant it was hitting 6 in the evening back in Chicago. The massive blizzard had fully materialized into a catastrophic winter storm. According to the latest news updates on my flight monitor, the city was buried under heavy snow. The brutal winds were howling, turning the roads into sheets of black ice. Right on cue, a silent vibration pulsed from my phone. A banner notification flashed brilliantly across the screen. Motion detected at front door. A cold thrill shot down my spine. I set my crystal glass aside and tapped the notification, bringing up the live security feed. The camera buffered for a fraction of a second before displaying the brightly lit, carpeted hallway outside my downtown apartment. The trap had officially been triggered. The heavy elevator doors slid open, and my toxic family spilled out into the corridor like a chaotic circus. They looked absolutely miserable, covered from head to toe in thick snow, shivering violently in their expensive, impractical winter coats. Jamal marched at the front of the pack, dragging two massive designer suitcases behind him. Ashley trailed closely behind, holding Jaden on her hip while trying to manage her luxury duffel bag. She looked deeply annoyed, her styled hair now wet and plastered flat against her forehead. Brenda and Richard brought up the rear, struggling to herd Tyler and Zoe down the hallway. The children had clearly been fed a massive amount of holiday sugar to keep them quiet. Now they were bouncing off the walls, screaming loudly, and hitting each other with wet mittens. I watched the screen intently as Jamal stomped right up to my front door. He did not even bother to ring the doorbell. He just raised his heavy fist and knocked loudly on the thick wood, an arrogant sound that echoed down the quiet corridor. He stepped back, shifting his weight impatiently, fully expecting me to throw the door open with a warm, subservient smile. I expected to smell roasting turkey and see a beautifully decorated living room waiting to entertain his unruly children. Instead, he was met with absolute deafening silence. The heavy door did not budge an inch. Jamal frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in confusion. He raised his fist and knocked again, much harder this time. The sound was sharp and demanding. "Samantha," he yelled, his voice picked up by the sensitive microphone on my security camera. "Open up right now. It is freezing out there, and the roads are an absolute nightmare. Let us in immediately." Nothing happened. The apartment remained completely quiet. Ashley shifted Jaden to her other hip, letting out a loud, dramatic groan. "Seriously," she whined, glaring at the door. "What is taking her so long? I am exhausted and my boots are soaked." Jamal reached out and grabbed the brass door handle, twisting it forcefully. It did not turn. The heavy deadbolt held the door firmly in place, presenting an unyielding physical barrier. Jamal rattled the handle, aggressively shaking the entire door frame. "It is locked solid," he announced, turning back to look at my mother. Brenda pushed her way through the screaming children and marched up to the door. Her face was a mask of irritation and rising panic. She pressed her face against the cold wood, trying to peer through the peephole. "It is completely dark inside," she muttered, her voice tinged with sudden anxiety. Brenda dropped to her knees right there on the hallway carpet. She pressed her cheek against the floor, trying to look through the narrow gap under the door to spot any sign of interior lighting. "Nothing," she gasped, standing back up and brushing the dust off her expensive coat. "The apartment is pitch black." The realization began to settle over them like a heavy blanket. The free, desperate babysitter they had banked their entire luxury vacation on was simply not answering the door. Jamal pounded violently on the heavy oak, hitting it with the flat of his palm so hard the security camera vibrated. "Samantha," he roared, completely losing his composure. "Open this door right now. We do not have time for this." The three children, sensing the chaotic tension, escalated their terrible behavior. Tyler threw his wet boots down the hallway. Zoe threw herself onto the floor in a massive tantrum. Jaden started wailing loudly. Richard nervously checked his luxury wristwatch, his face draining of color as the true severity of the situation finally hit him. "Brenda," he said, his voice shaking with panic. "It is 6:15. The flight leaves O'Hare at 9 o'clock sharp. The blizzard outside is a complete disaster. The roads are gridlocked with snow and ice. It is going to take us at least 2 full hours just to drive to the airport terminal from here. We do not have any more time to wait around for her." The panic instantly fractured their arrogant facade. Jamal kicked my door with his heavy boots, swearing loudly. Ashley began to hyperventilate, clutching her designer bag to her chest. "Mom, what are we going to do?" she cried, her voice cracking with terror. "We cannot miss that first-class flight. We cannot bring the kids with us. Where is she?" I sat in my plush airline seat, watching the magnificent, chaotic breakdown unfold live on my screen. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. The trap had sprung perfectly. I smiled as I prepared for the next phase of their inevitable destruction, fully knowing that the real nightmare for them was only just beginning to take shape. My smartphone vibrated against the tray table, shattering the silence. "On the security camera feed!" My mother jabbed her phone screen, her face twisted in panic. The caller identification flashed. "Brenda Mobile." I let the phone vibrate, enjoying the desperation radiating from the video feed. Ashley paced in the corridor, dragging a screaming Jaden, while Jamal kicked the baseboard of my door. I slowly swiped the green accept button and brought the device to my ear. I did not say a single word. I waited for her to speak. "Samantha, where on earth are you?" Brenda shrieked into the receiver. "We are standing right outside your apartment door. The kids are having a meltdown, and you are not answering the bell. Open this door right now. We have a flight to catch tonight, and we do not have time for games." I reclined into the plush cushions of my seat, gazing out the small window at the endless expanse of stars above the dark Atlantic Ocean. I took a deep breath, quietly savoring the absolute power I now held. "I am not playing any games, Mom," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "I decided to cancel our little Christmas Eve dinner." "Cancel it?" Brenda gasped, her voice cracking with hysterical disbelief. "You cannot cancel Christmas Eve. We are already here. We brought the children. Open the door right this second. Jamal is going to miss his flight and Ashley is panicking. Let us inside your apartment immediately." I took a slow sip of my vintage champagne, letting the crisp liquid cool my throat before delivering the final blow to her illusion. "I am not inside the apartment, Mom," I stated, my tone chillingly flat. "The security system is armed and the deadbolts are locked. I am not coming to the door because I am not in Chicago." The line went dead silent. Through the security camera feed, I watched Brenda freeze entirely, her phone pressed hard against her ear. Jamal stopped kicking the wall. Ashley froze in her tracks, her eyes wide with sudden terror. The background noise of the crying children seemed to fade into a hollow echo. "What do you mean you are not in Chicago?" Brenda whispered, her voice shaking violently. "Where are you? You promised you would host us. We have a vacation in Aspen and we cannot take the kids with us." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I heard exactly what you said in the living room last week, Mom. I stood on the snowy porch and listened to every toxic word you plotted against me. I heard you tell Jamal and Ashley how you were going to lock me inside my own home, abandon my niece and nephews, and rush off to the airport to enjoy a vacation funded entirely by my stolen corporate credentials and forged bank accounts." Brenda let out a choked gasp. "Samantha, I can explain. You misunderstood the conversation. We were just joking around." I cut her off instantly. "You said I was 33, single, and had absolutely no life. You confidently declared that watching your grandchildren for 2 weeks was my mandatory duty because I sit around doing nothing all day anyway. You built an entire scheme around the arrogant assumption that I was just an isolated scapegoat who would quietly absorb your abuse and raise Ashley's children." I paused, letting the devastating reality of my words sink into her brain. I watched the live feed as Brenda staggered backward, leaning heavily against the corridor wall. Jamal stared at her with panicked eyes, silently demanding to know what I was saying. "So I went to find a life," I continued, my voice echoing with triumph. "I used my bonus to book my own escape. I am currently flying at 30,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, heading toward a 5-star resort in Zermatt. I will be enjoying hot stone massages while you figure out what to do with 3 screaming toddlers in a historic Chicago blizzard." "Samantha, please," Brenda sobbed, abandoning all pride. "You cannot do this to us. We will miss the flight. We will lose all that money. We have nowhere to leave the kids. Please just call a friend to watch them. Do something to fix this. We need to leave for O'Hare right now." I smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace radiating through my body. "I am not fixing anything for you ever again," I replied coldly. "You created this disaster, and now you get to live in it. Enjoy Aspen, Mom, assuming you make it to the airport." I moved the phone away from my ear and tapped the red end call button. I opened my settings and switched my device to airplane mode, severing their only lifeline. The connection was permanently broken. I slowly turned my attention back to the live security camera feed on my tablet. Brenda slowly lowered her phone, her hands shaking violently. She looked at Jamal and Ashley, her face drained of color, her jaw hanging slack. She mouthed the words, "She is not here," and the fragile illusion of their perfect vacation shattered. Ashley dropped her luxury duffel bag onto the floor and let out a piercing scream. She stomped her feet while Jamal cursed loudly at the ceiling. Richard leaned against the elevator bank, burying his face in his hands, looking physically ill. The children, completely ignored by their panicking parents, began wailing louder than ever. They were completely stranded. The blizzard outside was dumping inches of snow. By the minute, the roads were becoming impassable, and they were trapped with heavy luggage and nowhere to go. They had absolutely no backup plan because their entire scheme relied on my total submission. I watched them scramble and yell, tearing their toxic alliance apart. I picked up my crystal flute, took a sip of champagne, and closed the application. My new life of freedom had officially begun. But human curiosity is an incredibly powerful force, and the sweet taste of absolute vindication compelled me to tap the security application icon one last time. The high-definition screen flickered back to life, dropping me right back into the brightly lit hallway outside my apartment door. The scene had rapidly devolved from panicked confusion into pure madness. Jamal was completely losing his mind. The arrogant insurance broker who had spent the last week bragging about his impending luxury vacation was now red in the face, veins bulging in his neck. He stepped back and delivered a vicious kick right to the center of my reinforced steel door. The loud thud echoed sharply, followed immediately by Jamal howling in genuine pain and hopping backward on one foot. He had likely bruised his heel right through his expensive winter boots. He cursed loudly, punching the wall in impotent rage. Ashley was faring even worse. The pristine golden child suddenly stripped of her reliable safety net and forced to face actual parenting completely unraveled. She dropped her oversized luxury duffel bag and literally fell to her knees on the hallway carpet. She buried her face in her hands, her wails competing with the deafening shrieks of her three terrified children. Tyler was repeatedly kicking his younger sister Zoe, who was throwing a massive tantrum. Jaden was wandering aimlessly, smearing sticky candy residue all over the wallpaper. Ashley did not even attempt to comfort them. She just sat on the floor weeping over her ruined vacation, proving exactly how ill-equipped she was to handle life without my constant intervention. Brenda was spinning in frantic circles, her perfectly coiffed hair unraveled as panic completely consumed her. "Richard, do something right now," she shrieked, hitting my father on the shoulder. "We are going to miss our first-class flight. It leaves at 9 o'clock and the blizzard is getting worse. We have to get to the airport." Richard looked completely helpless. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he stared blankly at the crying toddlers. "We cannot take them to Aspen, Brenda," he yelled back, finally showing a crack of genuine stress. "We do not have tickets for them, and we certainly cannot leave them here. We have to take them with us. Ashley, get up right this second." Ashley wailed louder, refusing to move. "I cannot deal with them," she screamed. "I am not taking 3 kids on a luxury ski trip. Call your friends." Brenda pulled her phone out, her fingers trembling as she desperately swiped through her contacts. She began making frantic phone calls, searching for anyone who would agree to take 3 unruly children on Christmas Eve during a historic blizzard. She was pleading with distant relatives, but every single call ended in immediate rejection. No sane person was going to answer that desperate plea on a holiday. Jamal limped over and grabbed Ashley roughly by the arm, hauling her to her feet. "Get the kids and grab the bags," he ordered, his voice dripping with pure venom. "We are leaving right now. We will drive to O'Hare and dump the kids at your parents' house on the way." Brenda immediately protested, claiming her house was in the exact opposite direction and the roads were becoming impassable. The blizzard outside was dumping heavy snow, turning the highways into a gridlocked parking lot. If they detoured to the suburbs, they would absolutely miss their flight window. The argument rapidly escalated into a vicious screaming match right there in my hallway. Jamal blamed Brenda for hatching a stupid plan. Brenda blamed Ashley for not controlling her children. Ashley blamed Richard for not breaking down my door. The toxic alliance that had historically united them against me had completely shattered under the first sign of real pressure. Finally realizing the clock was aggressively ticking down, they frantically grabbed their suitcases. Jamal dragged Tyler by the collar of his winter coat. Brenda scooped up a kicking Zoe and Ashley carried a crying Jaden. They shoved their way back into the elevator, leaving behind a trail of melted snow-crushed candy and absolute misery. I watched the metal elevator doors slide shut, officially sealing their fate. They were now forced to cram 3 hysterical children, 4 highly stressed adults, and a mountain of luxury winter gear into Jamal's leased sedan. They were going to spend the next 2 grueling hours trapped in a confined space, battling deadly ice storms and holiday traffic, desperately trying to salvage a vacation that was already rigged to financially destroy them. The camera feed went quiet. I let out a long, satisfying breath. I closed the application for the final time and swiped down on my phone screen. I tapped the small crescent moon icon, activating the Do Not Disturb feature. The digital wall was officially erected. No more frantic messages. No more demanding calls from a family that viewed me as disposable. I looked up as the flight attendant glided down the aisle, pausing gently at my first-class pod. "Is everything to your liking, Miss Samantha?" she asked with a warm, genuine smile. I stretched my legs out fully in the spacious cabin, feeling the soft cashmere blanket wrap around me, like a warm embrace. "Everything is absolutely perfect," I replied smoothly. "But I would love another glass of that vintage champagne, please." She nodded and quickly returned with a fresh, chilled glass, the golden bubbles rising perfectly. I raised the crystal flute to the small airplane window, looking out at the endless expanse of dark sky and brilliant stars. Beneath me, the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly, carrying me further away from the toxic wasteland of my past. My family was currently sliding blindly on frozen roads, completely unaware that the real nightmare was waiting for them at the airport check-in desk. I took a slow sip of my champagne, closed my eyes, and let the gentle hum of the jet engines carry me toward my new life. Without a single glance backward at her crying children or her shivering, panic-stricken parents, Ashley grabbed the remaining luggage and sprinted toward the terminal entrance. Jamal charged ahead of her, pushing aggressively through the crowded sidewalk. They completely abandoned Brenda and Richard in the freezing slush, surrounded by honking cars, angry police officers, and three hysterical toddlers. The golden child and her husband rushed frantically through the sliding glass doors of the airport, their eyes fixed desperately on the glowing blue signs of the VIP priority check-in desks. They believed their luxury vacation was just moments away. They were blissfully unaware that they were sprinting headfirst into the ultimate financial slaughterhouse. The automatic sliding glass doors of Terminal 1 parted, and Jamal and Ashley practically stumbled into the brightly lit, chaotic departure hall. The airport was a miserable sea of stranded humanity. Thousands of exhausted, anxious travelers were sprawled across the floor, sleeping on their cheap luggage or waiting in economy check-in lines that snaked endlessly around the building. Babies were crying overhead, announcements were blaring cancellation after cancellation, and the air was thick with the smell of damp wool and stale coffee. Jamal and Ashley did not spare a single glance of sympathy for the struggling crowds. Instead, they shook the heavy melting snow from their expensive designer jackets and immediately adopted the haughty, untouchable posture of the ultra-rich. They firmly believed they were completely insulated from the misery surrounding them. Jamal adjusted the collar of his damp coat, puffed out his chest, and marched purposefully past the miserable economy passengers. He aimed directly for the glowing, uncrowded sanctuary of the first-class VIP priority check-in zone. A velvet rope guarded the entrance, manned by an exhausted airport employee attempting to manage the frantic crowds. Jamal did not even break his stride. He aggressively unhooked the velvet rope himself and pushed his way through, dragging the massive snowboards and luxury suitcases behind him. Ashley followed closely on his heels, violently shaking her wet hair and complaining loudly about the humidity in the terminal, ruining her expensive blowout. They strutted up to the pristine, empty VIP counter with absolute unearned arrogance. A seasoned ticketing agent named Margaret was standing behind the glowing podium. She had been dealing with angry, stranded passengers for 12 straight hours, but she maintained her practiced professional smile as Jamal approached. Before she could even offer a standard greeting, Jamal loudly slapped their 4 passports directly onto the polished marble counter. The sharp smack echoed in the quiet priority zone. "We are on the 9 o'clock direct flight to Aspen." Jamal barked, his voice dripping with condescension and aggressive urgency. "We have 2 executive first-class suites booked under my name. We are running incredibly late because the traffic outside is a complete disaster, so I need you to bypass the standard baggage weight checks and print our boarding passes right this second. We need immediate access to the first-class lounge before we board." Margaret blinked, slightly taken aback by his sheer hostility, but she maintained her corporate composure. "Of course, sir," she replied evenly, picking up the passports. "I just need your confirmation number to pull up the executive itinerary." Jamal haughtily recited the confirmation code, spelling out the letters with exaggerated, insulting slowness, as if speaking to a child. Margaret turned her attention to her dual monitors and typed the alphanumeric sequence into the airline highly secure reservation system. She hit the enter key, fully expecting to see a standard VIP boarding clearance. Instead, her entire screen instantly flashed a blinding violet red. A massive flashing warning banner eclipsed her entire monitor. The bold, capitalized letters warned of a Level 1 corporate fraud breach. The system explicitly instructed her not to issue the tickets under any circumstances. Furthermore, the protocol mandated that she immediately verify the identity of the individual standing in front of her and silently trigger the airport security protocol. The trap that Diana and I had meticulously constructed in the cybersecurity division had worked flawlessly. The system recognized that the highly restricted VIP employee code attached to the booking had been reported stolen. Margaret was a seasoned veteran of the airline industry. She had dealt with stolen credit cards and angry fraudsters before, but a Level 1 corporate alert was exceptionally rare. Her face remained completely neutral, a perfect poker face honed over decades of customer service. She did not gasp. She did not alert Jamal to the catastrophic error on her screen. She simply stepped back half a pace, lowering her hands out of sight behind the elevated marble counter. With a subtle, practiced movement, she pressed her thumb firmly against the silent security alarm button hidden directly beneath her keyboard. "There seems to be a slight delay in processing the executive clearance, sir," Margaret said smoothly, buying time for the authorities to respond. "I just need to verify the primary payment method used for the incidental holds on this specific reservation. Could you please provide the credit card associated with the booking?" Jamal let out a loud, theatrical groan of pure annoyance. He threw his head back and rolled his eyes at Ashley, silently asking her to witness this supposed incompetence. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he snapped aggressively, pulling his leather wallet from his inner coat pocket. He pulled out his personal credit card and threw it onto the counter. "I am a premier executive client, traveling on a fully paid premium corporate itinerary. The system should already have all my information stored. Swipe the card and print the passes right now. We are actively missing our complimentary lounge service because of this ridiculous delay." Margaret picked up the credit card, verifying the name, matched the fraudulent reservation. She swiped it through her terminal, fulfilling the final requirement of the corporate trap. The system instantly recognized the card, locking it into the network to execute the punitive $40,000 chargeback. "Sir, I am going to need a supervisor to clear this specific alert," Margaret stated calmly, stepping away from the keyboard and folding her hands together. Jamal completely lost his temper. He slammed his fist down on the marble counter, his face turning an angry mottled red. "I do not have time for a supervisor," he roared, his loud voice echoing across the terminal and drawing the attention of the miserable passengers stranded in the nearby economy lines. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am flying on a top-tier executive corporate account. Print the damn first-class tickets immediately, or I swear I will have your job by tomorrow morning." Ashley stepped up beside him, crossing her arms defensively. "This is entirely unacceptable," she whined, glaring at the agent. "Our children are waiting outside in the freezing cold with my parents. We need to get to Aspen tonight. We demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this terminal right now." "You are going to speak to exactly who is in charge, ma'am," a deep, commanding voice echoed from directly behind them. Jamal and Ashley spun around simultaneously. The blood instantly drained from their faces. While Jamal had been busy screaming at the ticketing agent, a heavily armed tactical response unit of the Chicago Airport Police had silently converged on the VIP check-in desk. Four large, imposing officers in dark uniforms stood in a rigid semicircle, completely cutting off any possible avenue of escape. Their hands rested firmly on their utility belts, their expressions deadly serious. The trap had firmly shut its jaws, and the glorious destruction of their arrogant empire was finally ready to begin. An imposing airline executive stepped through the perimeter of armed police officers. She wore a sharp navy blue blazer with a gold supervisor nameplate resting on her lapel. Her posture radiated absolute corporate authority, the kind of unyielding discipline designed to crush unruly passengers. She held a sleek digital tablet in her left hand and a printed manifesto of their fraudulent reservation in her right. Jamal swallowed hard, his previous bravado evaporating as he looked at the tactical belts and stern faces of the officers flanking her. "Are you Jamal and Ashley?" the supervisor asked, her voice carrying zero warmth and demanding absolute compliance. Jamal forced a nervous, defensive chuckle, attempting to regain his footing in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of his control. "Yes, that is us," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger toward the marble counter. "Look, there has clearly been a massive misunderstanding here. We are just trying to catch our flight to Aspen. We have an executive reservation. The ticketing agent is having some sort of technical malfunction with the billing system." The supervisor did not even glance at the ticketing agent. She looked directly into Jamal's eyes with a chilling, predatory calmness. "There is no technical malfunction," she stated clearly. "You are attempting to travel using a highly classified corporate VIP employee code. That specific numerical credential belongs exclusively to a senior executive within the hospitality conglomerate. This morning, that exact executive officially reported the credential as stolen. You have committed felony corporate wire fraud." Ashley gasped loudly, gripping the sleeves of her expensive designer winter coat. She frantically looked around at the growing crowd of stranded economy passengers who had stopped shuffling their bags to watch the wealthy couple get publicly detained. "This is a ridiculous mistake," Ashley shrieked, her voice pitching upward in desperation. "My sister is the executive. She let us use the code as a Christmas gift. We are family. You cannot arrest us for accepting a family gift. Call her right now. She will clear this whole thing up." The supervisor tapped her digital tablet, pulling up the undeniable, irrefutable corporate audit logs that I had meticulously prepared. "Corporate VIP employee codes are strictly non-transferable under any circumstances," she explained, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "They require biometric authentication for any legitimate booking. Furthermore, the executive in question filed a sworn, legally binding affidavit directly with our corporate security division. She explicitly stated that her credentials were electronically skimmed from her secure work laptop without her knowledge or consent. She absolutely did not authorize this travel. Consequently, these luxury tickets are permanently voided. You are not flying to Aspen tonight or ever again on this airline." Jamal's face drained of all color, transforming into a sickly, pale shade of gray. The reality of his impending arrest was crashing down on him. He raised his hands defensively, backing up a half step, until an airport police officer placed a firm, unyielding hand squarely between his shoulder blades, physically preventing any retreat. "Okay, fine," Jamal stuttered, sweat suddenly beading on his forehead despite the freezing draft blowing through the terminal doors. "If the tickets are voided, just give me my passports and my credit card back. We will just leave. We will go home right now. We do not want any trouble." The supervisor offered a smile entirely devoid of any actual amusement. "You are not leaving, and you certainly are not getting a free pass for attempting to defraud a global corporation," she declared. "You see, when you aggressively demanded that my ticketing agent swipe your personal credit card to secure the incidental charges, you actively triggered our automated corporate fraud penalty protocol. By presenting your government-issued identification and willingly providing your primary payment method for a stolen reservation, you legally assumed full financial liability for the entire breached itinerary." Ashley let out a confused, panicked whimper. "What does that mean?" she demanded, stomping her snow boot on the polished floor. "What penalty?" The supervisor turned the digital tablet around, shoving the brightly illuminated screen directly into Jamal's terrified face. "It means the airline system has automatically executed a non-refundable, undiscounted punitive chargeback to the personal credit card you just handed us. You attempted to steal $40,000 worth of first-class aviation and luxury hospitality services. Therefore, as per the strict corporate security guidelines you agreed to when you swiped your card, we have successfully charged your personal account the full penalty rate of exactly $40,000. The transaction has already cleared the merchant gateway." Jamal let out a loud, barking laugh of pure, desperate denial. He aggressively shook his head, refusing to accept the catastrophic financial reality. "You are completely bluffing," he sneered, pointing a shaking finger at the tablet. "My credit card company would never authorize a random $40,000 charge. They would flag it as suspicious activity immediately and block the entire transaction. You cannot just steal my money. The supervisor maintained her glacial composure. We are a verified top-tier global merchant, she corrected him. You physically presented the card. You demanded we swipe it. It was processed as an authorized card-present transaction. I strongly suggest you check your mobile banking application right now. Jamal's hands shook violently as he reached into his heavy coat pocket. He pulled out his smartphone, his thumbs fumbling against the glass screen. He frantically typed in his passcode, his breathing growing rapid and shallow. Ashley leaned over his shoulder, her eyes wide with terror as the banking application loaded its home screen. The digital numbers materialized on the glowing display, and a horrifying guttural sound escaped Jamal's throat. The screen was painted in devastating red text. The $40,000 corporate penalty charge had indeed bypassed all standard fraud alerts because of the airline's trusted merchant status. The catastrophic withdrawal had completely obliterated his available credit line. Worse, IT had triggered immediate overdraft protocols that aggressively pulled funds from his linked personal checking and savings accounts to cover the massive deficit. Jamal stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single word. His available credit was zero. His checking account was violently overdrawn by thousands of dollars. His savings had been entirely wiped out in a fraction of a second. The luxury ski vacation he had so arrogantly bragged about to his friends had just financially ruined him. He was completely broke, standing in the middle of a massive blizzard surrounded by armed police officers. "My money is gone," Jamal whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "It is all gone. The account is totally maxed out." Ashley snatched the phone from his trembling hands, staring at the negative balances with absolute horror. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream that echoed all the way to the security checkpoints. She dropped the luxury snowboards onto the terminal floor with a loud crash, completely abandoning the expensive gear. The beautiful, untouchable golden child had finally been forced to step into the harsh, unforgiving light of reality. Their stolen empire had crumbled to dust, and the police were now moving in with handcuffs ready. Jamal snapped completely. The realization that his financial life had been instantly obliterated by an automated charge pushed him over the edge of rational thought. He lunged forward, throwing his expensive smartphone violently against the polished marble check-in counter. The device shattered into dozens of pieces, scattering jagged glass across the floor. "Give me my money back right now!" he roared, his voice cracking with unhinged fury. "You have no right to steal from me. I will sue this airline into bankruptcy." He aggressively pointed his finger directly into the airline supervisor's face, screaming obscenities that echoed throughout the cavernous terminal. The stranded economy passengers, who had previously been exhausted, were now fully engaged, holding up cell phones to record the meltdown. The tactical airport police officers did not hesitate. When Jamal took an aggressive step toward the airline supervisor, the lead officer grabbed Jamal by the collar of his designer winter coat. "Sir, step back and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded with absolute authority. Jamal, blinded by his arrogant rage, made the catastrophic mistake of violently jerking his shoulder away and shoving the officer's arm. "I am not going anywhere until you refund my $40,000, he yelled, resisting the command. The officers responded with swift, overwhelming force. In a fluid motion, two officers grabbed Jamal's arms, sweeping his legs out from under him and forcing him face first onto the hard terminal floor. The loud thud of his chest hitting the tile sent a shockwave of silence through the crowd. "Get off me!" Jamal shrieked, kicking his legs desperately as the officers pressed a heavy knee into his back. "You cannot do this. We are taking a luxury vacation." The sharp click of steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists echoed with profound finality. The lead officer hauled Jamal roughly to his feet, ignoring his frantic protests. "You are under arrest for disorderly conduct, assaulting an officer, and suspected federal wire fraud," the officer announced loudly. Ensuring the crowd heard every single word. "You have the right to remain silent." Jamal's arrogant facade completely dissolved into blubbering tears. He was publicly humiliated, stripped of his dignity, and paraded through the crowded departure hall in handcuffs. The passengers watched with immense satisfaction as the fraudster was marched toward a holding cell. Ashley was left completely alone at the priority check-in desk. Her golden child status offered absolutely no protection against the brutal reality of the criminal justice system. She fell to her knees right there in the middle of the terminal, her expensive coat pooling on the dirty floor. She began sobbing hysterically, her loud wails drawing disgusted stares from onlookers. She reached out toward her husband as the police dragged him away, but she could not stop them. The airline supervisor quietly picked up the voided passports and handed them down to the weeping woman. Please collect your luggage and exit the priority zone immediately, the supervisor instructed coldly. Your presence here is no longer authorized. Ashley clutched the useless documents to her chest, utterly paralyzed by the sudden destruction of her entire life. Meanwhile, just outside the sliding glass doors of the terminal, the situation was rapidly deteriorating into a completely different kind of nightmare. Brenda and Richard were standing on the icy curb in the middle of the raging blizzard. The howling wind whipped snow viciously against their faces. Tyler, Zoe, and Jaden were shivering uncontrollably, crying from the bitter cold and the chaos of being dumped on the sidewalk. Brenda hugged her thin designer coat tightly around her shoulders, her teeth chattering. Richard, go buy the children some hot chocolate from that indoor kiosk right inside the doors, she demanded, gesturing frantically toward a small coffee stand visible through the glass. They are freezing out here. What is taking Ashley and Jamal so long with the bags? Richard nodded nervously, his face pale from the dropping temperatures. He jogged through the automatic doors and approached the coffee kiosk, ordering 5 hot chocolates to warm his miserable family. He pulled his leather wallet from his pocket and confidently handed the cashier his premium bank debit card. The cashier swiped it through the terminal. It beeped aggressively. Declined, the cashier stated, handing the plastic card back. Richard frowned in deep confusion. Try it again, he insisted. I have thousands of dollars in that account. The cashier swiped it a second time, shaking his head. It says, contact your financial institution immediately. The card is locked. Richard felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. He quickly pulled out his credit card and handed it over. The machine beeped again, declined. Panic began to claw at his chest. He stepped aside, pulling out his smartphone. He logged into the secure bank portal, expecting to see a simple technical glitch. Instead, a massive security alert filled his screen. His checking account was frozen. His savings account was locked. His credit cards were suspended. A red message stated that all financial assets had been completely seized, pending an active federal investigation for signature forgery and identity theft. The $25,000 he had stolen from my joint account had triggered a total financial lockdown. Richard stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. He had no access to cash. He had no working credit cards. He could not afford a cup of hot chocolate to warm his freezing grandchildren. He walked slowly back out through the sliding glass doors, his face a mask of horror. Brenda looked at him expectantly. Where are the drinks? She snapped. Richard looked at his shivering wife, his terrified grandchildren, and the relentless blizzard burying the city. We have no money, he whispered, his voice completely hollow. The bank froze everything. We are trapped. They were stranded in the snow, entirely broke and ruined. They were stranded in the snow, entirely broke and ruined, while they suffered the consequences of their own actions. I was waking up to the most spectacular Christmas morning of my entire life. The golden morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my panoramic penthouse suite in Zermatt. I stretched my legs under the heavy goose-down duvet, feeling the crisp, clean alpine air radiating from the heated balcony outside. The majestic peak of the Matterhorn loomed in the distance, a breathtaking monument of rock and snow set against a perfectly cloudless blue sky. I slipped out of the massive mahogany bed and wrapped myself in a thick, luxurious white robe provided by the five-star resort. The heated marble floors warmed my bare feet as I walked into the main living area of the suite. A private concierge had already delivered a spectacular holiday breakfast spread. Freshly baked croissants, imported Swiss cheeses, cured meats, and a silver pot of rich dark coffee sat waiting for me on the elegant dining table. A fire crackled cheerfully in the stone fireplace, casting a warm golden glow across the room. I poured myself a steaming cup of coffee and walked out onto the balcony, breathing in the pure, freezing mountain air. I had successfully executed the ultimate escape. The heavy, suffocating chains of my family obligations had been completely severed. I stepped back inside the warm suite and finally reached for my smartphone, which had been resting on the nightstand in airplane mode since I crossed the Atlantic. It was time to survey the glorious wreckage I had left behind. I swiped off the Do Not Disturb setting and connected to the high-speed resort network. My phone immediately erupted into a chaotic symphony of vibrating alerts, chiming notifications, and endless missed call warnings. My lock screen was an absolute waterfall of frantic text messages, desperate voicemails, and aggressive social media tags. I bypassed the text messages entirely. I knew exactly where the real performance was taking place. I tapped the blue Facebook icon and watched my notification feed load. My sister Ashley had spent her miserable, ruined Christmas Eve crafting a massive, emotionally manipulative, highly dramatic social media post. She had tagged every single member of our extended family, ensuring maximum visibility and maximum outrage. I opened her lengthy post, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee as I read the desperate fiction she had constructed for the world. To all our friends and family, Ashley wrote her digital words practically dripping with fake tears. I am writing this from a cheap, freezing airport motel on what is supposed to be Christmas morning. My heart is completely shattered. My sister Samantha has committed an unforgivable act of pure evil against our family. Out of sheer petty jealousy over my beautiful marriage and my wonderful children, she hacked into Jamal's personal travel accounts and maliciously canceled our family holiday ski trip right as we arrived at the airport. She stranded us in the middle of a historic blizzard with 3 freezing, crying toddlers. When Jamal tried to fix her deliberate sabotage at the ticketing counter, the airline made a terrible mistake and wrongfully had him detained by the police. He spent Christmas Eve locked in a freezing holding cell while my parents and I huddled in the snow with the babies, completely terrified and alone. Samantha intentionally ruined our family Christmas just to make me suffer. I am entirely heartbroken that someone sharing my own blood could be such a cruel, vindictive monster. Please pray for my family today. The sheer audacity of her public post was almost impressive in its absolute detachment from reality. She had completely omitted the fact that the trip was funded by stolen money and a stolen corporate code. She conveniently left out their meticulous plan to trap me inside my apartment as an unpaid servant. She painted herself as the ultimate innocent victim, relying heavily on the emotional leverage of her shivering children and her supposedly wrongfully accused husband. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation designed specifically to weaponize our extended family against me. I scrolled down to the comments section, which was an absolute war zone of misplaced family loyalty and blind outrage. The extended family members, people who had ignored my existence for years, were suddenly aggressively activated by Ashley's weeping narrative. Aunt Carol, who never remembered my birthday, posted a furious paragraph about how I was a sociopath who needed immediate psychiatric help. Cousin Michael demanded that I wire Ashley money instantly to compensate for my jealous sabotage. Uncle Greg confidently declared that I should be the one sitting in a jail cell for ruining a sacred holiday for innocent children. Dozens of distant relatives were clutching their pearls, flooding the feed with angry emojis and vicious insults. They were calling me a monster, a failure, a jealous spinster, and a complete disgrace to the family name. The comments were an echo chamber of toxic enabling, all rallying behind the golden child, without a single shred of actual evidence. I sat at my elegant dining table eating a warm, buttery croissant while I read through every single hateful comment. In the past, reading these vicious attacks from my own blood relatives would have sent me into a devastating spiral of anxiety and desperate apologies. I would have frantically called everyone, crying and begging them to listen to my side of the story. I would have twisted myself into knots trying to clear my name and restore the peace. But today, surrounded by absolute luxury and unshakable financial security, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical amusement. They were all reacting exactly the way I knew they would. They were performing their assigned roles in my mother carefully constructed social drama. They firmly believed that if they shrieked loudly enough on the internet, I would eventually cave to the immense social pressure and beg for their forgiveness. They thought the threat of family excommunication would bring me to my knees. They were completely wrong. I set my coffee cup down and cracked my knuckles. I did not intend to write a long emotional defense. I did not need to scream or cry or plead for anyone to believe me. I possessed something far more powerful than Ashley fake tears and manufactured outrage. I had the absolute, undeniable, legally binding truth. I opened the photo application on my phone and selected the 3 specific files I had carefully prepared before leaving Chicago. The digital guillotine was polished razor sharp and absolutely ready to drop. I smiled at the glowing screen, tapped the reply button directly under Ashley Post, and prepared to permanently obliterate their entire social existence. I smiled at the glowing screen, tapped the reply button directly under Ashley Post, and prepared to permanently obliterate their entire social existence. I did not type out a massive defensive paragraph. I did not waste a single second of my luxurious morning addressing Aunt Carol unhinged accusations or Cousin Michael aggressive demands for immediate financial compensation. Engaging with their manufactured hysteria would only validate their twisted victim narrative and give them the toxic attention they desperately craved. My career in high-stakes corporate auditing had taught me the ultimate rule of catastrophic conflict resolution. You never argue with the dedicated liar. You never try to appeal to the morality of a thief. You simply present the indisputable, devastating paperwork and let the cold, hard facts choke them into absolute silence. I opened my secure cloud storage drive and selected 3 specific files I had prepared for this exact moment. The first file was the high-definition video and audio export from my apartment hallway Ring camera recorded just hours ago during their epic meltdown. I uploaded the pristine digital file to a secure public hosting link, ensured the viewing permissions were set to unrestricted, and pasted the URL directly into the Facebook comment box. I typed a single concise sentence directly above the link. For anyone concerned about my supposed malicious sabotage, please watch this footage of Ashley, Jamal, and Brenda actively screaming about their premeditated plan to illegally abandon 3 toddlers in a freezing hallway so they could flee to a luxury ski resort. I knew exactly what my extended family would see when they clicked that first link. The video clearly captured Brenda screeching at Jamal to just leave the crying children behind. It showed Ashley aggressively refusing to take her own babies to Aspen because they would ruin her upscale aesthetic. It featured Jamal physically kicking my property while openly admitting they intended to force me into unpaid non-consensual servitude. It was a high-resolution, digitally time-stamped masterpiece of horrific parenting and undeniable child abandonment. The pure hypocrisy of Ashley, playing the devoted, heartbroken mother in her post, would be instantly shredded. The second our relatives heard her screaming that she could not stand to be around her own children. The second file was a redacted PDF of the official banking investigation notice I had procured from the branch manager yesterday morning. I generated the second public link and pasted it right below the first. I kept my keyboard strokes steady and unhurried. I typed my next sentence. For anyone demanding I financially compensate Ashley for her ruined holiday trip, please carefully review this active federal fraud investigation detailing how Richard brazenly forged my signature to steal my $25,000 life savings to fund Jamal luxury vacation. When my judgmental aunts and uncles clicked that second link, they would not find empty accusations. They would find a scanned, highly official document prominently displaying the bank formal letterhead. The file proved the frozen status of my father's entire financial portfolio and outlined the pending grand larceny charges for identity theft and bank fraud. It completely obliterated the illusion that they were innocent victims stranded by a petty, jealous sister. They were active felons caught dead to rights by a federal banking institution. The document showed the exact routing numbers moving my stolen money directly into Jamal's personal checking account, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that their entire luxury excursion was financed by blatant, calculated theft. The final file was the absolute crown jewel of my revenge. I selected the official corporate security report that the director of cybersecurity had generated directly from my company fraud prevention network. I created the third and final link, pasting it into the text box. I typed my final sentence. For anyone wondering why Jamal was rightfully arrested and dragged away by airport police in handcuffs on Christmas Eve, please review this corporate security log proving he stole my highly restricted executive credentials to illegally book $40,000 in first-class flights, triggering an automated felony wire fraud chargeback to his own credit card. That third link was the ultimate executioner blade. The corporate document showed the exact IP address used to steal my VIP code, the unauthorized passenger names, and the automated corporate penalty execution that had instantly bankrupted Jamal at the ticketing counter. It proved that I did not maliciously hack their accounts or sabotage their trip out of spite. It proved that they had stolen from a multi-billion-dollar hospitality conglomerate and were currently facing severe criminal prosecution from a massive corporate legal team. I reviewed the comment before posting. It was entirely devoid of raw emotion, lacking any exclamation points, angry emojis, or desperate pleas for understanding. It was a cold, clinical, and totally lethal execution of facts. I hit the enter key on my phone and watched the thin blue loading bar shoot across the top of my screen. The comment posted successfully pinning itself directly beneath Ashley's hysterical tear-stained manifesto. I did not wait around to watch the likes and replies trickle in. I locked my phone screen, set the device face down on the smooth mahogany dining table, and picked up my warm buttered croissant. I took a bite, savoring the flaky pastry and the rich flavor of the imported butter. The digital bomb had been successfully dropped directly into the center of their fragile social ecosystem. The blast radius would be absolute. I poured myself another cup of dark roast coffee and turned my attention back toward the breathtaking view of the Swiss Alps, allowing the layered conflict resolution to do exactly what it was designed to do. I had handed the extended family the smoking gun, the financial receipts, and the police records. The hollow empire my mother had spent her entire life building was about to burn to the ground, and I was going to enjoy every single second of the warmth from the flames. I let a full hour pass before picking up my smartphone again to survey the digital carnage. When I finally unlocked the high-definition screen, the online landscape had completely transformed. The blind rabid outrage that had fueled Ashley's comment section just 60 minutes prior had evaporated entirely, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. The notification bell chimed a completely different tune now. I watched in real time as Aunt Carol hastily deleted her vicious paragraph calling me a sociopath. Cousin Michael rapidly erased his aggressive demands for immediate financial compensation. Uncle Greg scrubbed his entire profile of any association with the post. The irrefutable evidence I provided had acted like a bucket of ice water thrown directly into their faces. They had watched the undeniable security footage. They had clearly heard Ashley screaming about refusing to parent her own babies because they would ruin her aesthetic. They had read the official banking and corporate police reports detailing the massive theft. The initial wave of panicked deletion was swiftly followed by a massive, devastating backlash. The relatives who had blindly supported the golden child suddenly realized they had publicly defended unapologetic thieves and child abandoners. A new wave of comments flooded the post, but this time the venom was aimed squarely at my sister and my mother. Aunt Carol posted a fresh comment, expressing absolute disgust that Brenda would actively conspire to leave 3 toddlers locked in a freezing hallway during a historic blizzard. Cousin Michael demanded to know why Richard thought it was acceptable to forge a signature and steal a life savings from his own daughter. Ashley's meticulously crafted victim narrative was shredded into pieces by her own blood relatives. She tried to reply, claiming the videos were manipulated, but the sheer weight of the federal and corporate documents crushed her feeble lies. The public humiliation on social media was just the outer perimeter of the blast radius. The real unfiltered carnage was happening inside the Family First group chat. The notification badge hovered with over 200 unread messages. I opened the thread and scrolled to the top of the war zone. Uncle George, my father's older brother, and the respected patriarch of the extended family, had unleashed a biblical level of fury. He demanded to know exactly what Richard was thinking, committing a federal banking felony against his own child. My mother attempted to defend her, sending frantic, poorly spelled text messages, claiming the videos were taken out of context, and the $25,000 was just an early inheritance advance. Her desperate excuses were immediately shot down and mocked. Aunt Patricia replied with a screenshot of the police report detailing Jamal's violent arrest for wire fraud, asking, "Brenda, how getting handcuffed and dragged across a ticketing counter could possibly be taken out of context." The group chat became a brutal, unforgiving tribunal. The extended family, terrified of being legally associated with federal criminals, actively distanced themselves. They explicitly told Brenda and Richard that they were no longer welcome at any future holiday gatherings or family reunions. Ashley tried to interject, whining about how she was currently stranded at the airport terminal with a maxed-out credit card, freezing children, and no way to get home. She begged for someone to wire her money for a taxi. Her desperate plea was met with absolute punishing silence. The people who had enabled her toxic entitlement for 3 decades had finally slammed the door shut in her face. But the catastrophic fallout did not stop at the borders of our family tree. Ashley, in her arrogant haste to destroy my reputation, had mistakenly set her original post to public instead of friends only. She wanted the whole world to pity her, but she accidentally handed the entire internet the perfect viral spectacle. The security camera footage of their hallway meltdown was too outrageous, too perfectly unhinged to remain contained. Strangers began sharing the post, tagging local drama groups and Chicago community boards. The narrative shifted from a private family dispute into a massive public spectacle of wealthy entitlement meeting swift, brutal justice. The internet is a ruthless place, and online detectives quickly went to work. They found Jamal's public business profiles, linking the screaming arrested man in the airport video directly to his professional persona. Jamal had always boasted about his lucrative career as an independent insurance broker, using his flashy title to project an aura of wealth and immense responsibility. He utilized social media extensively to attract high-net-worth clients, presenting himself as a highly trustworthy financial advisor. That carefully curated image was completely incinerated within hours. Angry strangers and disgusted local community members began tagging Jamal's insurance brokerage directly in the viral thread. They posted the corporate security report detailing his $40,000 theft right onto his company's public review pages. They demanded to know why a prestigious financial institution was employing a man who was actively sitting in a holding cell for committing felony wire fraud. The corporate response was swift and merciless. By noon on Christmas Day, the brokerage firm had issued a public statement on their own page, completely disavowing Jamal's actions and announcing his immediate termination pending the ongoing criminal investigation. But the professional execution went even deeper. In the heavily regulated financial sector, an arrest for wire fraud is an absolute death sentence. The state licensing board was tagged in the viral fallout by several vigilant industry watchdogs. They immediately opened a formal review to permanently strip Jamal of his insurance broker license. His ability to earn a living in the financial industry was legally terminated. He would never sell another policy, never sign another contract, and never wear another designer suit purchased with stolen funds. The man who had arrogantly kicked my front door and demanded first-class luxury was now an unemployed, disgraced felon, sitting in a concrete cell facing massive corporate debt and the complete evaporation of his entire career. Fast forward 3 months into the bitter thawing end of the Chicago winter. The catastrophic domino effect that began on Christmas Eve had completely leveled the hollow empire my family once proudly paraded. The severe consequences of their unhinged greed did not simply fade away after the holiday season ended. Instead, the reality of their massive legal and financial liabilities settled over them like a suffocating, immovable weight. To fully pay off the staggering $40,000 corporate penalty charge levied by my employer, Jamal and Ashley were entirely and completely financially gutted. The credit card company mercilessly pursued the massive overdraft, aggressively seizing whatever liquid assets they had left in their name. But the corporate penalty was merely the beginning of their comprehensive destruction. Jamal required an exorbitant defense attorney to keep him out of federal prison for the felony wire fraud and disorderly conduct charges stemming from his violent airport arrest. Legal representation of that caliber demands massive upfront retainers. With his insurance broker license permanently revoked by the state board and his professional reputation incinerated across the internet, Jamal had absolutely zero incoming revenue. The aggressive repo men arrived at their sprawling suburban rental home in late January. They unceremoniously towed away Jamal's leased luxury sedan and Ashley's massive premium sport vehicle right in the middle of a busy Saturday afternoon. Their wealthy neighbors stood on their pristine porches openly watching the humiliating spectacle unfold. Unable to afford the astronomical monthly rent without Jamal's bloated insurance commissions, the golden couple faced immediate eviction. They were forced to violently downgrade their entire lifestyle, packing whatever designer clothes they could fit into garbage bags and abandoning the upscale Chicago suburbs completely and forever. They relocated to a tiny rundown two-bedroom apartment in a heavily congested, loud neighborhood miles away from their former glamorous life. The cramped space barely had enough room for a single dining table, let alone the luxury aesthetic Ashley had built her entire online identity around. Her social media accounts, once a daily stream of expensive manicures and high-end brunch photos, were completely abandoned. She deactivated her profiles out of sheer overwhelming embarrassment. To barely survive and make the aggressive monthly payments to their defense lawyers, both Ashley and Jamal were forced into the grueling reality of the minimum wage workforce. The man who used to strut around in custom-tailored suits was now working 60 hours a week, driving a beat-up delivery van and picking up night shifts stocking shelves at a local warehouse. Ashley, who had proudly mocked my corporate career and declared herself a lady of leisure, was forced to accept a humiliating retail position at a discount clothing store. She spent her days standing on her feet for 9 hours straight, folding cheap sweaters and dealing with angry, demanding customers, enduring the exact kind of grueling, exhausting labor she used to openly mock. While my sister and her entirely disgraced husband were slowly drowning in manual labor and crippling debt, my parents were facing their own spectacular self-inflicted apocalypse. Richard's arrogant decision to forge my signature on that withdrawal slip had triggered a relentless federal banking probe. The bank had permanently frozen all of his retirement portfolios and checking accounts during the investigation. To avoid a lengthy prison sentence for bank fraud and identity theft, Richard was legally forced to liquidate the majority of his remaining accessible assets, cashing out his carefully guarded investments at a massive penalty just to pay for his own desperate legal defense. He narrowly avoided a prison cell, but the exorbitant legal fees, combined with the mandated restitution paid directly to the bank, left my parents completely financially drained. Their comfortable, wealthy retirement was entirely wiped out in the span of 90 days. They were left with nothing but their heavily mortgaged colonial house and a rapidly dwindling empty savings account. But the absolute most poetic justice of this entire saga was the ultimate punishment handed down by their own disastrous choices. Because Ashley and Jamal were now working exhausting double shifts just to keep the electricity on in their tiny apartment, they could no longer afford even the cheapest daycare, let alone the upscale preschools Tyler and Zoe used to attend. They certainly could not afford an expensive professional nanny. This meant the three wild, undisciplined children had to go somewhere during those grueling 60-hour work weeks. They were dumped unceremoniously on the doorstep of my parents' house every single morning at 6 o'clock sharp. Brenda, the woman who had coldly declared that watching her grandchildren was the duty of a pathetic single woman, was now permanently trapped in her own living nightmare. The woman who had plotted to lock me in an apartment so she could sip hot cocoa in Aspen was now serving as a full-time, entirely unpaid nanny to three incredibly destructive toddlers. Her pristine, quiet colonial house was transformed into an absolute war zone of scattered toys, spilled juice, and constant, deafening screaming. She no longer attended social luncheons. She no longer hosted elegant dinner parties for her affluent friends. She spent her days covered in sticky baby food, breaking up violent fights between Tyler and Zoe, and desperately trying to potty train a screaming Jaden. Richard, equally exhausted and deeply miserable, spent his very long, quiet days hiding away in his dark study, trying helplessly to escape the relentless noise of the children he had once so proudly enabled. The toxic alliance they had built to exploit my independence had completely collapsed, leaving them shackled to the severe, inescapable consequences of their own actions. They had selfishly tried to forcefully trap me into a life of miserable, unpaid servitude, but the universe had perfectly reversed the roles. They were now all permanently, utterly trapped in the exact prison they had meticulously designed and prepared for me, completely exhausted, financially broken, and entirely alone with the chaotic, utterly destructive family dynamic they had so arrogantly created. I returned to Chicago in the first week of January, stepping off the plane with a profound sense of absolute clarity and renewed purpose. The grueling winter storm had long since passed, leaving the city streets crisp clear and perfectly navigable. I walked into the soaring glass atrium of our corporate headquarters, not as the reliable, exhausted scapegoat my family had always envisioned, but as a razor-sharp executive who had successfully protected her conglomerate from a highly malicious internal security breach. The corporate fallout from Jamal and Ashley, attempting to steal $40,000 in luxury travel, had triggered an immediate top-level executive review within the highest echelons of the company. Diana, the director of cybersecurity, had meticulously presented my flawless handling of the crisis directly to the global board of directors. The board was thoroughly impressed by my ruthless efficiency, my unwavering dedication to corporate policy, and my absolute refusal to allow personal relationships to compromise the financial integrity of our luxury brand portfolio. They recognized that I possessed the exact kind of cold, calculated precision required to govern international operations. By the end of my first week back in the office, I was formally summoned to the top floor boardroom. The chief executive officer personally shook my hand, offering his profound gratitude for my actions. He did not just commend my auditing skills. He officially promoted me to the highly coveted position of Executive Vice President of Audit Operations. The promotion came with a massive salary increase, an expansive corner office overlooking the majestic Chicago skyline, and a full team of subordinate auditors reporting directly to me. My toxic family had plotted to destroy my entire career and leave me financially ruined, but their incredibly foolish, arrogant betrayal had inadvertently catapulted me to the absolute pinnacle of corporate success. Fast forward to early spring. I was sitting at a perfectly set table inside a legendary 3 Michelin star restaurant in the heart of Paris, France. I was in Europe for a 2-week international business trip, overseeing the integration of a newly acquired portfolio of boutique French hotels. The restaurant was a masterpiece of classic Parisian elegance, featuring sparkling crystal chandeliers, intricate gold molding, and a sweeping romantic view of the illuminated Eiffel Tower. I wore a stunning custom-tailored evening gown, my hair perfectly styled, savoring a glass of incredibly rare vintage wine. The atmosphere was a world away from the chaotic, screaming misery of my parents' crowded suburban house. I sliced into a decadent, beautifully plated culinary creation, letting the rich flavors melt on my tongue. I took a moment to truly appreciate the profound, beautiful silence surrounding me. There were no demanding text messages buzzing on my smartphone. There were no manipulative phone calls asking me for emergency loans. There were no ungrateful siblings expecting me to sacrifice my hard-earned time and money to fund their shallow, superficial lifestyles. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation had been completely severed, and the resulting freedom was absolutely intoxicating. For 33 years, I had allowed my mother to dictate my worth. She had relentlessly tried to convince me that because I was unmarried and independent, my life was somehow empty and devoid of any real meaning. She had weaponized the concept of family to exploit my generosity and drain my resources, all while actively conspiring to ruin my future. But sitting here in Paris, a highly respected corporate executive with absolute financial security and a passport full of stamps, I realized the absolute truth. I was never the failure. They were simply parasites feeding off my success, terrified of the day I would finally wake up and realize I never actually needed them. I took another long, satisfying sip of my expensive vintage wine, reflecting on the absolute perfection of my ultimate revenge. I did not even scream. I did not have to throw a massive temper tantrum or lower myself to their pathetic toxic level. I simply stepped completely out of the way and allowed their own monumental destructive greed to pull them straight down into the dark abyss. They had meticulously constructed an elaborate, highly malicious trap designed specifically to steal my freedom, my money, and my dignity. They believed their plan was absolutely foolproof because they fundamentally misunderstood who I was. They saw a quiet, compliant daughter who always followed the rules. They completely failed to see the highly trained, ruthlessly efficient auditor who spent her entire life tracking down liars and ensuring that criminals paid heavily for their actions. Now they were paying the ultimate price. While they scrubbed cheap retail floors, fought off aggressive debt collectors, and wiped runny noses in a miserable, crowded house, I was conquering the global corporate hospitality sector and dining in absolute luxury. The contrast was not just poetic, it was the purest form of justice I could have ever imagined. My life was finally my own, unburdened by guilt, unbothered by their endless drama, and entirely focused on my own brilliant future. I set my elegant wine glass down on the crisp white linen tablecloth and looked directly toward the camera, a genuine, completely unbothered smile radiating across my face. The journey from being an exploited, exhausted scapegoat to an empowered, untouchable executive had been challenging, but the resulting peace was worth every single difficult step. I learned that true family is about mutual respect, not parasitic extraction. You do not owe your life, your resources, or your sanity to people who only value you for what they can aggressively take from you. The power to change your story is entirely in your hands, and walking away is often the bravest, most rewarding choice you will ever make. Family is not a free pass for exploitation. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away and letting them pay their own bills. If you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives, share your story below. Hit like and subscribe for more. I returned to the bustling heart of Chicago in the first week of January, stepping off my first-class flight with a profound sense of absolute clarity and renewed purpose. The grueling winter storm that had completely decimated my family, fraudulent vacation plans had long since passed, leaving the city streets crisp clear and perfectly navigable. I walked into the soaring glass atrium of our corporate headquarters, not as the reliable, exhausted scapegoat my parents had always envisioned, but as a razor-sharp executive who had successfully protected her multi-billion-dollar conglomerate from a highly malicious internal security breach. The corporate fallout from Jamal and Ashley attempting to steal $40,000 in luxury travel had triggered an immediate top-level executive review within the highest echelons of the company. Diana, the director of cybersecurity, had meticulously presented my flawless handling of the crisis directly to the global board of directors. The board was thoroughly impressed by my ruthless efficiency, my unwavering dedication to strict corporate policy, and my absolute refusal to allow personal relationships to compromise the financial integrity of our luxury brand portfolio. They recognized that I possessed the exact kind of cold, calculated precision required to govern international operations. By the end of my first week back in the office, I was formally summoned to the top-floor boardroom. The chief executive officer personally shook my hand, offering his profound gratitude for my actions. He did not just commend my auditing skills. He officially promoted me to the highly coveted position of Executive Vice President of Audit Operations. The promotion came with a massive salary increase, an expansive corner office overlooking the majestic Chicago skyline, and a full team of subordinate auditors reporting directly to me. My toxic family had plotted to destroy my entire career and leave me financially ruined, but their incredibly foolish, arrogant betrayal had inadvertently catapulted me to the absolute pinnacle of corporate success. I spent the next few months completely immersing myself in my new executive role, traveling across the country to audit premium properties and implement new security protocols. I thrived in the fast-paced, high-stakes environment, pouring all the energy I used to waste on my family into building an unstoppable professional empire. I was respected, highly compensated, and entirely unbothered by the miserable, chaotic reality my relatives were currently enduring back in their cramped, suffocating apartments. Fast forward to early spring. I was sitting at a perfectly set table inside a legendary 3 Michelin star restaurant in the heart of Paris. I was in Europe for a 2 week international business trip, overseeing the integration of a newly acquired portfolio of boutique French hotels. The restaurant was a masterpiece of classic Parisian elegance, featuring sparkling crystal chandeliers, intricate gold molding, and a sweeping romantic view of the illuminated Eiffel Tower. I wore a stunning, custom-tailored evening gown, my hair perfectly styled, savoring a glass of incredibly rare vintage wine. The atmosphere was a world away from the chaotic, screaming misery of my parents' crowded suburban house. I sliced into a decadent, beautifully plated culinary creation, letting the rich flavors melt on my tongue. I took a moment to truly appreciate the profound, beautiful silence surrounding me. There were no demanding text messages buzzing on my smartphone. There were no manipulative phone calls asking me for emergency loans. There were no ungrateful siblings expecting me to sacrifice my hard-earned time and money to fund their shallow, superficial lifestyles. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation had been completely severed, and the resulting freedom was absolutely intoxicating. For 33 years, I had allowed my mother to dictate my worth. She had relentlessly tried to convince me that because I was unmarried and independent, my life was somehow empty and devoid of any real meaning. She had weaponized the concept of family to exploit my generosity and drain my resources, all while actively conspiring to ruin my future. But sitting here in Paris, a highly respected corporate executive with absolute financial security and a passport full of stamps, I realized the absolute truth. I was never the failure. They were simply parasites feeding off my success, terrified of the day I would finally wake up and realize I never actually needed them. I took another long, satisfying sip of my expensive vintage wine, reflecting on the absolute perfection of my ultimate revenge. I did not even scream. I did not have to throw a massive temper tantrum or lower myself to their pathetic, toxic level. I simply stepped completely out of the way and allowed their own monumental, destructive greed to pull them straight down into the dark abyss. They had meticulously constructed an elaborate, highly malicious trap designed specifically to steal my freedom, my money, and my dignity. They believed their plan was absolutely foolproof because they fundamentally misunderstood who I was. They saw a quiet, compliant daughter who always followed the rules. They completely failed to see the highly trained, ruthlessly efficient auditor who spent her entire life tracking down liars and ensuring that criminals paid heavily for their actions. Now they were paying the ultimate price. While they scrubbed cheap retail floors, fought off aggressive debt collectors, and wiped runny noses in a miserable, crowded house, I was conquering the global corporate hospitality sector and dining in absolute luxury. The contrast was not just poetic. It was the purest form of justice I could have ever imagined. My life was finally my own, unburdened by guilt, unbothered by their endless drama, and entirely focused on my own brilliant future. I set my elegant wine glass down on the crisp white linen tablecloth and looked directly toward the camera, a genuine, completely unbothered smile radiating across my face. The journey from being an exploited, exhausted scapegoat to an empowered, untouchable executive had been challenging, but the resulting peace was worth every single difficult step. I learned that true family is about mutual respect, not parasitic extraction. You do not owe your life, your resources, or your sanity to people who only value you for what they can aggressively take from you. The power to change your story is entirely in your hands, and walking away is often the bravest, most rewarding choice you will ever make. Family is not a free pass for exploitation. Sometimes the best revenge is simply walking away and letting them pay their own bills. If you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives, share your story below. Hit like and subscribe for more. The most profound lesson is that absolute silence is often the most devastating weapon against exploitation. In narrative content creation, we often expect the protagonist to engage in explosive confrontations. However, Samantha's meticulous dismantling of her family's hollow empire teaches us that true empowerment comes from a different kind of strength, the refusal to participate in the chaos. When faced with staggering betrayal, her immediate instinct was not to scream, argue, or beg for the respect she inherently deserved. Instead, she recognized that toxic individuals rely entirely on their victims' predictable compliance to fuel their schemes. By simply stepping out of the way and erecting ironclad financial and legal boundaries, she allowed her family's monumental greed to become the exact instrument of their own destruction. They built the trap, she merely handed them the lock. This story serves as a masterclass in protecting personal peace. It highlights that we do not owe our valuable resources, our sanity, or our future to people who view us merely as tools for their own convenience, even if those people share our bloodline. Walking away and letting exploiters pay the price for their choices is not an act of cruelty, but an act of profound personal preservation. You completely hold the pen to your own script, and you have the absolute right to write out the characters who bring nothing but destruction. Take a moment today to evaluate your boundaries and firmly walk away from anyone who only values what they extract from you.